This is a German short row tutorial and a knit along tutorial for the Talkeetna Beanie. It comes in different sizes, so it can be adjustable to whatever size head you have, and it also comes in different weights. This is worsted and this is in Malabrigo Rios. This is a chunky bulky yarn. This is Malabrigo Mecha. So the patterns are relatively similar. The only thing that really differs between the two patterns is how many rows you do for specific sets, but they are both going to have the same brim pattern where you knit 3, purl 2 all the way around. For chunky, you will do 25 rows, and for worsted, you will do 28 rows. So I've already completed my 28 rows, and optionally you can make the brim longer if you want. The best way to check if your brim is long enough is to fold it inside out, fold the beanie up like you will have the brim, and so on the front side you can see this is how long your brim will be, and then if you look on the back side, the other portion of the brim should be half the length of the full brim. So you're basically going to do a brim and a half. So once you have your brim decided, you are now beginning the first German short row. So German short row essentially makes it so you are knitting backwards. Normally you would knit this direction, but with German short row you are gonna knit this direction. So what that does is it sort of flips the work inside out, so it'll flip between the front and the back side. This is really useful so that when you have a brim, you can make this neater, nicer side on the outside of the hat and not get stuck with the not so neat inside of the hat. It's also helpful for this pattern. It makes things go a lot faster, so that's great. So German short row, the first thing that you do is you physically flip your hat around. So the hat was facing you before and now it is facing away. I like to pull my hat through so it is facing me at all times, and now I can see that it is flipped as I'm looking at the bottom of the brim. And a good thing to note is you can knit and you can flip the hat back and forth and it will not change the direction that you are knitting. It's just what you see, but you'll end up with the same thing even if this is this way or that way. But the German short row is what changes the direction. So the yarn that is attached to the ball is on the left needle, but in order to keep knitting, that needs to be on the right needle. So the first step is to slip that stitch purlwise, pull the yarn up and over as if to do a yarn over, and now you begin to knit normally. So it's just that simple. One tip that's really important is that when you are doing this first initial stitch, try to make it as tight as possible. It can kind of create a little bump in the pattern if you knit it loosely, so the tighter you knit, the better. And then when you knit all the way around to the other side, you are going to knit these 2 stitches together. Alright, so I have knit 1 round after doing the German short row, and now I am back to the beginning. So you will slip that stitch marker onto the right needle, and then you can see here that these 2 stitches right here, one is the slip stitch and one is the yarn over. It's important that you knit those 2 together, because if you don't knit them together, you will end up with an extra stitch. When doing German short row, it is also important to knit this stitch as tight as possible so that you don't end up with a hole in your hat. So I will knit those 2 together and then I will continue knitting. One important thing to note with German short row is that you continue on the side that you are knitting until you reach the next German short row. So in the pattern it now calls for 12 rows of straight knit. So I'm going to stay on this side, I'm going to knit those 12 rows, and then I'll get to another German short row, and that's when I do the flip. Alright, so we have now finished those 12 knit rows, and you do have the option to knit more rows if you would like a longer brim or more space in between the brim and when the pattern starts. If you fold up the brim, you can see that the outside of the brim will fold up to be on the outside of the hat. So right now we are knitting on the outside, but if the brim is folded down, you can see that the brim is inside out. So where we are in reference to this hat is we have just finished these stitches right here that are going to go under the brim, and we are about to do the first pop-up for the pattern. So on worsted this is 5 stitches, and on chunky it is 3 stitches. So the first thing that the pattern calls for is to do another German short row. So we flip our work so it is facing the other direction. We are going to move that stitch marker, and then we're going to, I prefer personally to pull the hat through before I start knitting. So I pull the hat through. That first stitch we are going to slip it purlwise. We are going to pull the yarn from the front to the back over the needle like a yarn over, and then we are going to continue knitting from there. So what you will notice is that when we just did that German short row, the hat flipped. So now you have the outside pattern of the brim, and all those knit stitches that you did now look like purl stitches. And the stitches that you'll knit now will look like knit stitches on this side. But when you flip it the other way, these purl stitches will look like knit stitches, and these knit stitches you're doing on the inside are going to look like purl stitches. Alright, so now that we have finished those 5 rows, and that would be 3 if you were doing chunky, you can see that those are all knit stitches on the inside, and that those 12 rows we did before look like purl, and that the brim currently looks like it is right side out. One way to check if you're on the right side or the wrong side is, and this only works if the hat is facing you when it's pulled through, if you fold the brim up and the brim is wrong side showing, that means that you are on the inside of the hat. However, if it's facing you and you fold it up, and I'll demonstrate this in a minute, and the right side is out, then you are on the right side of the hat. So the next step that we are going to do, we just finished this first bubble here, and so now we need to do this next set of knit stitches. So in order to do that, we have to do another German short row. So we are going to flip our work around. We are going to pull the hat through to face us. And then we are going to do the German short row. So you have the yarn on the left side here. We want to slip that on purlwise to the right needle, pull the yarn up and over, and then we are going to continue to knit normally. And this is another reminder that when you get all the way around at these 2 stitches, it's going to look like 2, but it's actually 1 stitch, so you have to make sure you knit those together. If at any point you count your stitches and you have 1 extra, it's not the end of the world, just knit 2 stitches together to get back to the amount that you needed. So you can see now that we've done the GSR and it's facing up, if we fold the brim up, we can see that the right side of the brim is facing out. This means that we are on the outside of the hat. So we have here the brim, this is going to go under the brim, and then we have that first bubble that's going to pop out right here. So next we're knitting this knit section. Alright, so now that we have done that section of 9, if this was on chunky, it would have been a section of 7. You can fold the brim up and see that we've been working on the outside. And when you compare this to the finished hat, you can see that it is time to do 1 more of the bumps on the outside. So what we have to do in order to do that is we take our knitting to do a German short row, we flip it around, we pull the hat through to face us, we slip the stitch marker, and then we slip the first stitch, pull the yarn up and over, and then and then continue to knit. So now we are on the inside of the hat, and as we knit, it will turn into the purled bumps on the outside. And another reminder to knit those 2 stitches together when you get there. So we have now finished this set of 9 knit stitches. So you can see that you have the brim, and if you fold that up when it's facing you, is the wrong side of the hat. So we know we're on the inside. Then we have those 12 stitches. Then we have 5, 9, and 5. So we're going to continue with the pattern. So 9 will be next. Here is a finished hat where you can see the 12, the 5, the 9, the 5, the 9, and then you start to decrease. And on the bulky, you have 3, 7, 3, 7, 3. So you continue on with that pattern, doing a German short row every time you switch between each set. We will do a German short row here, so we will flip the hat around. We will pull it through. When it starts to get this big, it can be a little bit of a hassle to pull through, but you do the same thing that you've been doing. You slip that first stitch as tightly as possible. You pull that yarn over for a yarn over, and then you try and knit that first stitch nice and tight so that when you get back around and you're knitting those 2 stitches, or the stitches that look like 2 together as 1, you can knit them as tightly as possible. All right, so we can see here comparatively to the finished hat that we have just completed this section right here. So now we're going to need to do a German short row and do one more of these pop-out sections. So we take our work, we flip it around, pull it through, and then, let's see if I can find my yarn over here. We take the first stitch, slip it purlwise, pull the yarn up and over nice and tight, and then we continue knitting. So the pop-out section, we are now knitting on the inside of the hat. You can see that because the brim is right side out, or if you fold it up while it's facing you, then you see the wrong side of the brim. So we know that we're on the outside. So we are going to do 5 rows, and this would be 3 rows if you were doing worsted. 3 rows if you were doing bulky. All right, so I have finished my last row that will bubble up on the end. Compared to the finished hat, I just finished this row right here. So in the pattern, it gives you an option to add another section, a set of these into the pattern if you want to slouch your fit or you have a bigger head. But my hat that I'm knitting right now is a gift for a friend, so I'm just going to go into the decrease. So I start with the German short row. So I flip it around, I pull the hat through, and you can now see that we are looking at the outside of the hat. You have the bumps, and then you have the brim. Let's see if I can get this to fold up. You have the brim that folds up, and you see that you are looking at the right side of the brim. So when I do my German short row, same as before, slip the first stitch, pull it over the top, knit the first stitch tightly, and then the pattern says to knit the rest of the round. So I knit the rest of the round, and when I get back to this original slip stitch, even though the next row starts as decreasing, you only count this as 1 stitch, even though you knit two together. So you will knit them as a knit 1, and then you'll continue to follow the pattern for the decreases. And in the pattern, there is also an alternative decrease if you switched. So you are not following a set of 10, but you're following a set of 5. There's an extra row in the decrease to make sure that you get the nice spiral decrease. All right, so the hat is finished. It will look like this, and then you fold up the brim, and you can now see that the outside pattern is on the outside of the hat. So in the notes, it talks about sewing in the brim. If you look at the other one, as you can see, the brim is attached to the hat. This is optional, you don't have to do it, but I found that if you're wearing the hat and the brim isn't sewn in, that'll kind of move all over the place and it doesn't stay on as comfortably. So to keep it cohesive and comfortable, I prefer to sew in the brim. So I have been sewing mine in with about 3 stitches away from the first little pop out of the pattern. You are welcome to sew it really wherever you like. Some people might like it lower, some people might like it all the way up. It just varies. However, I do not recommend going over 9 stitches for worsted and 7 stitches for bulky. If not, that section will be much bigger than the other sections and it might just look a little weird. But again, totally up to personal preference. So what I do when I am sewing in the brim is I'll decide where I want it. So I'm gonna have it 3 stitches. So I count 1, 2, 3 stitches down, and you can use sewing pins or I use stitch markers. And what I do is I go in and I pin that in place. So I will go all the way around and put those in place. All right, so I have placed them around the hat so that the brim is even the entire way around. And then I like to work at the back of the hat, which the way I usually find the back is that where you did the German short row, you can see just like a slight kind of bump. So I want to start at the back, work my way around. So what I'll do is I use some leftover yarn from the same yarn that I was using. If you don't have a lot of leftover yarn, and though you don't need very much, you can use some other yarn. You won't be able to see it anyway. So I start by slipping the needle through, and then I pull it back up, and then I make sure to pull enough string that you will have enough to get all the way around. And then I try to go back in pretty close to the one that I just did. So it came out here, so I'm gonna go back in like a stitch, half a stitch over, and then I'll go over like 3 or 4 stitches on the bottom and then pull it back up. This way you are keeping it in place, but you are still ending up with most of the yarn on the inside. All right, so I have now sewn in that yarn around the brim. I like to end with both my tails on the inside so that when I tie it, it's hidden on the inside. So what I want to make sure to do is stretch that yarn out as much as you can. That way you won't end up with the hat accidentally ending up too tight just because of that yarn that's through there. So I just pull around the hat in different directions, and once I'm satisfied that it can't get any looser and that it's not too tight, I'll go back, oops, where'd it go? Back to the inside where I have these 2 ends of the yarn, and I just tie them in a sort of loose knot that's hanging out. I'll leave like a little bit of space, like maybe about this much space, tie it in a double knot or a triple knot if you want to be extra careful. And then once I have tied that knot, I'm gonna do a triple. Once I have tied that nice and tight, then I'm going to trim the edges right here, and then I will use that threading needle again to sew them into the backside so they're not sticking out. Once you do that, the final step is to add a pom-pom. You do not have to, but I think that it looks nice with a pom-pom the way that it slouches. You can add the pom-pom, either a fur pom-pom or a yarn pom-pom, whichever method you prefer. So after you have done that, you will have your finished hat where the brim is sewn in and you have the pom-pom on top. And I personally prefer to wear my hat. Sometimes it can be hard to find exactly where the back is, and if you find that you can't tell, then it doesn't matter, but I tend to wear mine with this back part where the German short rows pop up a little bit in the back, because once you wear the hat and it slouches back like this, then you can't tell that they're there at all. All right, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to seeing your finished hat, and if you have any questions or anything like that, then you can contact me on Instagram. That's where I'll probably respond the fastest. My Instagram is CuriousConundrums. Happy knitting!